Have you ever felt like there's got to be more to stories like Noah's Ark than what you learned as a kid? Well, today we are diving into a really fascinating idea that sits right at the crossroads of faith, history, and, believe it or not, modern physics. We're going to see how one simple shift in how we look at things can completely unlock a new way of understanding some of the world's most ancient stories. So let's jump in. You know, for so many of us, these stories, Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, they're just part of our cultural wallpaper. But as we get older, things can get complicated. Do we have to defend every single detail literally, even when it feels like it bumps up against, science and everything else we know about the world? Or do we just file them away as simple, maybe even childish stories? The source material we're digging into today actually has a name for this. It calls it the Gentiles' dilemma. And it's that feeling of being caught between two worlds. On one side, you've got a literal reading of scripture that can sometimes seem to defy all logic. And on the other, you've got our modern scientific way of seeing things. It really feels like you have to pick a side, right? But what if that's the wrong way to even think about it? What if this whole conflict, this whole dilemma, just comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding? Like, what if we've been reading these ancient accounts from the wrong point of view all along? The source we're looking at proposes a single, really powerful principle that might just change everything. And here is. It's called the principle of perspective. Now, the idea itself is actually pretty simple, but its implications are huge. It's the idea that what we're reading in these ancient texts isn't some divine, all-seeing, God's eye view of history. No, instead, these are human reports told from the very limited, very personal point of view of the person who actually saw it happen. Okay, so this brings us to a really crucial difference. On one hand, you have this idea of an absolute, objective truth, reporting events as they actually happened. But on the other hand, you have a relative, subjective truth, reporting events as they appeared to me. The moment we shift from that first way of thinking to the second, so many of those big paradoxes and conflicts, they just kind of dissolve. Let's use a classic example, probably the biggest one, the story of Noah's flood. Genesis tells us, point blank, that the whole earth was covered with water. And for centuries, this has been a huge point of conflict between science and a literal reading of the Bible. But watch what happens when we apply the principle of perspective. We can add a crucial little phrase. The whole earth was covered as far as Noah could see. See? The story isn't necessarily making a massive geological claim about the entire planet. It's giving an accurate report from the perspective of the observer, Noah, on the ark, whose entire horizon was nothing but water. It makes perfect sense. I mean, this is exactly why he had to send out birds, because his own view was totally limited. And you know what's so cool? The story itself gives us the perfect metaphor for this idea. Think about the rainbow, the symbol of the covenant God makes with Noah. A rainbow is a phenomenon that literally depends on your point of view. It can only appear with the perfect alignment of you, the observer, the sun behind you, and the rain in front of you. If you move, the rainbow moves with you, or just disappears. It's a physics lesson in relativity baked right into the story. Now, this whole idea of an observer-centric reality, it's not just some fringe theological idea. In fact, it has this absolutely stunning parallel in a well-established principle of modern physics. Okay, this quote describes something called the Anthropic Cosmological Principle. That sounds really complicated, I know, but here's what it basically means. It's the scientific idea that the laws of the universe seem perfectly fine-tuned for life because, well, if they weren't, we wouldn't be here to observe them in the first place. In this view, the observer isn't just some passive person looking at the universe. Our very existence is a fundamental piece of the cosmic puzzle. And this idea is literally woven right into the cosmology of certain scriptures, like the LDS Book of Abraham. Throughout its descriptions of the heavens, it is constantly grounding the perspective with this one phrase, upon which thou standest. It's this consistent, deliberate reminder that everything being described, from the stars to time itself, is relative to the observer's specific place in the universe. I mean, even time itself is presented as totally relative. These scriptures talk about multiple frames of reference. There's our time here on Earth, measured by the sun and moon. There's a distinct man's time. And there's even a God's time, which is calculated according to some governing star called Kolob. The message is just crystal clear. There is no single, absolute clock ticking for everyone everywhere. So, okay, if the universe is always described from an observer's perspective, what does that mean for the act of creation itself? Well, This framework presents it less as a single magical event and more as a dynamic, participatory process. According to the source, the creation story unfolds in stages. It's not just, poof, there's a tree. It starts with counsel and planning. Then it's about preparing the potential for things to emerge, not just zapping them into existence. Then the gods order the process to begin. And finally, they watch until the elements and the creatures obey the plan that was laid out. This brings us to another really cool concept from the source, the principle of maximum participation. And this is the idea that creation isn't something that's done to a passive, dead universe, but with an active one. Every creature, every element, to the very limit of its own capacity, is actively cooperating in its grand design. This quote right here is just so powerful because of that one word, obeyed. Think about that. It implies agency, doesn't it? It suggests that the raw materials of creation weren't just puppets on a string. They were given a design, a command, and then they were trusted to carry it out. The creators watched until they could be trusted to continue the process on their own. So let's take this multi-layered, relativistic way of seeing things and apply it to the central figure of our whole story, Adam. Instead of seeing him as just a character in one single event, we start to see a being who plays a whole bunch of different roles across many different states of existence. The source material presents Adam's journey not as a quick snapshot, but as this sweeping, multi-stage epic. First, he exists as a premortal spirit in a divine council. Then, he's actually part of an inspection committee during the creation. Then, he lives in a timeless, changeless paradise. After the fall, he becomes mortal, just like us, subject to our kind of time. After he dies, he's a spirit being. And finally, he's resurrected. Each of these stages is a fundamentally different state of being. So this completely challenges that common view of Adam's life as a simple one-act play. Creation, fall, redemption, boom, boom, boom. Instead, what we have is an ongoing saga with multiple acts, where the main character is passing through totally different realities and even has different relationships with time itself. So what's the big takeaway from looking at these ancient texts through this relativistic lens? Well, it offers a pretty profound redefinition of what it even means to be human in the first place. And here we are at the source's most striking conclusion, the dividing line, the thing that separates humanity from every other living thing. The moment Adam becomes Adam is defined by one single act. He starts keeping a record. It's the creation of a history, a genealogy, the act of looking backward to document your own story that marks the birth of true human consciousness. And this one thing, the act of observing, remembering, and recording, is what creates what the source calls an unimaginably enormous yet abrupt quantum leap. It's what separates the record keeper from every other creature on the planet. It is literally the birth of history, of identity, and a totally new kind of consciousness. And that brings us right back to you with a final, pretty provocative question. If the universe is fundamentally shaped by its observers, and if our very humanity is defined by the act of keeping a record, what story is your life writing? What account is your unique perspective creating right here, right now?